Hi everyone. Modern medicine is in a dire state. We doctors reactively treat the symptoms of complex diseases without understanding or addressing their root causes. Today I'm going to address a few of these, namely diabetes, obesity, and metabolic syndrome. And we'll touch on some of their spin-offs like high blood pressure, heart attacks and strokes, autoimmune diseases, Alzheimer's, and cancer. This is Coney Island in 1934, and you'll be hard-pressed to find an obese person amongst that whole crowd. Today, Coney Island Beach looks something like this, and there are many obese people on our beaches today. In the US today, 1/3 of people are obese and 1/3 are overweight. 20% of children are overweight or obese. 7.6% of the population are severely obese, and 1 in 400 people is morbidly obese. Obesity has tripled in the last 50 years. In China, obesity has gone from 1 to 6%, but in affluent areas it's greater than 20%. More and more young people in China are becoming obese. As far as diabetes goes, China has an incidence of 11%. That's 110 million people have diabetes. In 1980, 1% had diabetes. In 2000, 5.5% had diabetes. In the USA, the figure is closing in on 14%, and 38% are pre-diabetic. If you add those two together, that's greater than 50%. So what causes obesity? Conventional wisdom says it's calories in and calories out. All you have to do is eat less and move more. 99% of diets based on this premise fail within 2 years. Susan Mendonca from America's Biggest Losers famously says, NBC never has a reunion show because we are all fat again. Why is this? Well, let's look at this study on America's Biggest Losers. If you look over here, this is their resting metabolic rate. The black dots are before they began, and the white hollowed out dots are 30 weeks later, after the competition was over. So you can see this guy went from a resting metabolic rate of 3,600 calories to a resting metabolic weight of 1,800 calories. You can also see this is his fat-free mass. He went from nearly 100 kilograms down to 75 kilograms. He lost 25 kilograms of muscle and connective tissue, all of which contributes to your resting metabolic rate. The philosophy here is eat less and move more, and it fails dismally. So what is the cause of obesity? The proximate cause of this aeroplane crashing is that the upward force was less than the downward force. But that actually tells us absolutely nothing. Well, it could be pilot error, it could be mechanical error, there could be a number of other things that is the ultimate cause. Yes, the proximate cause of obesity might be calories in, calories out, but the ultimate cause I'm going to demonstrate to you is insulin resistance. Insulin is a hormone secreted by the pancreas, and one of its jobs is to act as a key to take up glucose into many cells. If you only need a small amount of insulin to do this, you are insulin sensitive. But if you need a lot of insulin, then you are insulin resistant. Your degree of insulin resistant, unfortunately, is genetically determined. So if you're the world marathon champ, You may be able to tolerate 400 grams of carbohydrates a day without putting on weight. If you're particularly insulin resistant, you may only tolerate 80 grams per day before you start putting on weight. What is patently clear is that 2/3 of Americans cannot tolerate the amount of carbohydrates they are eating because they are overweight. So the glycemic index is how high your blood glucose goes after consuming a certain food, and the glycemic load is how long that glucose stays up. So if you are insulin sensitive, you only need a small amount of insulin to get the glucose back to normal, and you do it rather quickly. But if you are insulin resistant, you need lots of insulin, and it takes a long time to get your glucose back to homeostasis. Insulin is a storage hormone. It drives fat into fat cells and keeps it there by inhibiting lipase and growth hormone. And it is well known that in type 1 diabetics who cannot produce any insulin, they waste away and they get a massively high blood glucose because they cannot store fat and they cannot drive glucose into the cells. So in any given 24 hours, you are either burning fat or you're storing fat, depending on your insulin level. If you want to lose weight, you need to get your insulin level down for as long as possible in that 24-hour period. And that is done by two mechanisms. It is determined by what you eat, and more importantly, it is determined by when you eat. So let's look at the glycemic index of some common foods. The glycemic index is how much does your blood sugar go up after eating 50 grams of a certain food. You can see here that butter doesn't stimulate your glucose at all and has a glycemic index of 0, and it therefore doesn't stimulate insulin either. Sugar, which we'll get to later, has a figure of 80, and bread and many of the other refined carbohydrates have a glycemic index of 100, which means that they stimulate insulin massively. Normal people have less than 5 grams of glucose in their whole blood volume, and complex carbohydrates break down to simple sugars, and that's what we use for energy. And you can see here that 2 slices of bread is equivalent to 5 teaspoons of sugar. A Coke is 9.5 teaspoons. Jungle Oats 100 grams, 11 teaspoons. Nestle chocolate, 11.5 teaspoons. A banana, 6 teaspoons of sugar. I'm not sure if you would put that amount of sugar in your tea. So the ultimate cause of obesity is high levels of insulin for a prolonged time. How do we know that? Anybody will get fat if you inject insulin. Diabetics know that it's almost impossible to lose weight when they're injecting insulin. Drugs that stimulate your insulin, like sulfonylureas, and other drugs, cause weight gain. Insulinomas cause huge weight gain, and when you remove the tumor, the patients lose weight. Type 1 diabetics cannot put on weight unless they start injecting insulin. Obese people have very high levels of insulin as compared to normal weight people. High levels of cortisol cause obesity by raising the blood sugar and hence raising the insulin. We know in transplant patients that when they go off their cortisone, their serum insulin falls by about 25%. Cushing's patients who secrete a lot of cortisol get fat. Addison's who don't secrete enough cortisol waste away. We know that mental stress raises blood cortisol and causes weight gain. Oral cortisone is known to be the cause of obesity, and in diabetics Their blood sugar and hence their insulin shoots up when they take oral cortisone. Insulin resistance is the Lex Luthor. It is time dependent and it takes many years to develop. It results in diabetes, fatty liver, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, blood lipid abnormalities, and many other things. But how does it develop? Insulin resistance develops because your insulin levels are too high for too long. So you can see that if you have 3 meals a day and you fast the whole night, your insulin is in the fat burning state for 12 hours. If you eat twice a day, it's 16 hours. And if you have 1 meal a day, your insulin is low for a long time. It also depends on the type of food you eat, how insulinogenic it is. Dietitians recommend a 60% carbohydrate diet and eat lots of small meals a day. That is the perfect recipe to keep your insulin up for long periods of time and the ultimate cause of obesity. Fructose has enjoyed saintly status. It's sweeter than glucose, it doesn't stimulate insulin, it's in fruit, it must be good. Wrong, it's the devil in disguise. Sugar is made up of 1 glucose and 1 fructose, and in the dosages we consume today, it is highly poisonous. Unlike in the 1900s when people ate 7 to 15 grams of fructose a day, mainly in the form of fruit, the average consumption today is over 40 grams, and many teenagers consume 80 or 100 grams of fructose a day, mainly in the form of sucrose or high fructose corn syrup. The mechanism deserves a whole lecture on its own, but basically what happens is glucose can be metabolized anywhere in the body, the muscles, the brain, and elsewhere, but fructose has to go to the liver. So only a small percentage of the glucose goes to the liver, but all of the fructose goes there. There it is meant to be changed into glucose or glycogen, but if those stores are filled, then what happens is it gets converted to fat, and not just normal fat, it's fat inside the liver. Now the liver becomes toxic, it can't metabolize the glucose, and insulin goes up. It is a potent driver of insulin resistance by causing fatty liver. The Chinese have traditionally eaten a high carbohydrate diet, but they didn't suffer from obesity or diabetes. It is thought that the introduction of sucrose and highly refined processed food has caused the fatty liver and led to the increased incidence of diabetes. The amount of sugar consumed in a year has skyrocketed in the last 160 years. It's gone up from less than 1 kilogram in 1700 to 50 to 60 kilograms a year today. At the same time, the obesity epidemic has mirrored this consumption. This is what 50 kilograms of sugar looks like, and some people consume way more than that. So what's the deal with diabetes? People with diabetes have chronic high insulin levels and insulin resistance, and over many years they develop an insulin resistance. In other words, the cells can't take up the sugar anymore, despite a high insulin level. Eventually, the glucose builds up in the blood, spills over in the urine, and you have full-blown diabetes. So what do we doctors do? We tell you to eat a 60% carbohydrate diet. Oh yes, and eat lots of small meals a day to keep your insulin up. We then give you pills, some of which raise your insulin even further. And when that fails, we tell you to inject insulin to keep the sugar down. So we keep your sugar down, we keep you alive, but we keep you chronically ill for many years, paying lots of money to drug companies. So like this Japanese train pusher, we give you insulin to force more and more glucose into the cells. And then we say, go along and lose some weight. It is absolutely impossible to lose weight while you're receiving injected insulin. Metabolic syndrome has the exact same cause and should be called the insulin resistance syndrome. Abdominal obesity is just a reflection of how much fat you have in your liver and your pancreas. Low HDL and high triglycerides, well known the cause of that is eating too many refined carbohydrates. High blood pressure in most instances is a insulin resistance thing, and your fasting blood glucose is high, and if we were to measure your fasting insulin, that too would be high. The metabolic syndrome is associated with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, fatty liver, autoimmune disease, inflammatory diseases, and cancer. So insulin resistance seems to be at the root of all evil. So let's recap the hormonal obesity theory. Fattening carbohydrates and some protein stimulate your insulin. Cortisol, usually due to mental stress, stimulates your insulin, gives you high insulin levels. Fructose, we've spoken about, causes fatty liver and potent insulin resistance. And high insulin leads to insulin resistance, which is the ultimate cause of obesity. So what is the solution? The solution is to get your insulin down and keep it down as long as possible. How do you do that? Eat foods that don't stimulate your insulin. Low carbohydrate, high fat. Also practice intermittent fasting so that you can have long periods of low insulin. Today I've just tried to define what the problem is, and yes, we do have a problem, and that problem is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is at the root of obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and all the resulting diseases that they cause. The cause of this insulin resistance is the SAD diet, the Standard American Diet, which is officially sanctioned by most credible bodies. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to go into further topics around this. Goodbye.